Welcome back to the third session of our online membership course. This session, I want to talk with you about what it means to lead within our capacity. As we spend this time together, I want to focus on the word stewardship. Stewardship is managing all of the resources entrusted to us by God. I think of the words of Psalm 24, verse 1, which says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." And here's what that means. It means I'm not the owner. God is. I'm simply the manager entrusted with everything that He has given to me. And that means it's my responsibility as a steward to do my best with what God has blessed. That's stewardship, doing my best with what God has blessed. And when I think about stewardship, I think about farmers. Farmers get this, farmers understand this, that ultimately everything is entrusted to them by God. From the seeds, to the soil, to the seasons. And they're taking the skills that they've been given over a set amount of time, and they're hoping that it produces a crop that not only benefits them, but that is a blessing to the world. And those same principles are at work in the Christian life. Everything that we've been given is a trust to us. We're to manage it well in a way that moves it forward, because that's leadership, really. It's taking the people around you and the skills that you possess and they possess, and it's moving things forward. So we do that whether it comes to the businesses that we are a part of, whether it's the families that we're raising or the church that we attend. Those are things that we're going to explore in this session together. So join me as we continue to understand what it means to lead as we're able. I want us to think about the word capacity. The word capacity means that you have the ability to do something. It means that you are capable of making a contribution. And so when we talk about leading within our capacity, it means that we recognize the gifts that we have, that God has poured into us. It never ceases to amaze me how I look around at people and I see how different we are. None of us has exactly the same skill set. None of us has exactly the same personality. We're all different, and yet we're invited to use all of those differences to make a contribution that makes the world a better place. There's a story that Jesus tells in Matthew chapter 25 called the parable of the talents. There's a businessman who's going away on a long trip, and so he diversifies his funds. He divides them amongst 3 different servants. It says to one he gives 5 bags of gold, to one he gives 2 bags of gold, to another he gives 1 bag of gold. And then it says, each according to their ability. And his desire is that they take what he's given to them, that they invest it, that they manage those resources in such a way that it increases. Elsewhere in Romans chapter 12, Paul points out that we each have different gifts according to the grace given to us. And so what we see is we have differing abilities in differing amounts. It makes me think of going to the grocery store. You ever gone to the grocery store and walked down the aisle where all of the drinks are? Like, it's overload when it comes to all the options that you have. There are so many different bottles, and they come in so many different sizes and flavors. Like, you can get water, and you can get it in the little bottles, or you can get it in the 16.9 ounce bottles, or you can get it as a gallon jug. Or you can get pop, but there's so many different flavors, and you can get it in a can, or you can get it in a 2 liter. Like, the options are endless. And this is the way that God has gifted us. We each have a different capacity. We have differing abilities in differing amounts. And sometimes the challenge is that we look at other people and we see the gifts that they have and the abilities that they have, and we're jealous of them, and we lament the fact that we don't have those gifts. You know, one of the servants did that in the parable in Matthew chapter 25. But Jesus' desire for us is simply to stop and celebrate what we have been given and to serve out of the skill set that we have to make the world a better place. Remember, stewardship is us doing our best with what we have been blessed with. I'm standing here with, on one side of the street, our church, and on the other side, if you look closely, it's the old City Hall of Young America. And when we think about how we use the gifts and abilities that God has given to us, we use them in both realms. We use them both for the sake of the world, for the society around us, and for the sake of the church. All of us have natural abilities. These are unique abilities and a skill set that God has given to us from the time that we are born to be developed situationally. And it doesn't matter whether we're a Christian or not. God gives these to all human beings. Martin Luther makes that clear in his explanation to the first part of the Creed. When he says, I believe in God the Father Almighty, what does this mean? He says, I believe that God has given me my reasons and all my senses. And out of that, he's given me the ability to do work in this world, to make a contribution to the lives of others. I think back to when I was in high school and I took an aptitude test. We were asked to look at a number of different skills and to identify which skills we had. And out of that, it spit out this report that helped us to see what some possible jobs were that we could do. I remember when I got that test back, it identified that I had skills in the area of teaching and in counseling. And I look at what I'm doing now, and I realize that as a pastor, a lot of the time is focused on teaching and on counseling. And I look at the family that I grew up in, and I realize that my mom is a teacher, my dad is a pastor. And so what I saw in them, that was something that was passed on down to me in my life. All of us have these natural skills, these natural abilities that God has given to us. I've included in your packet for this session an abilities assessment. What I'd like to encourage you to do at this time is simply to pause and to look at that abilities assessment. There's a list of probably 30 different skill sets that people possess. Some are artistic skills, some are musical skills, some are mechanical skills, some are teaching skills, some are promoting skills or public relations skills, some are landscaping skills. There's a whole list of skills. I want you to look through that list and identify which skills you have, or maybe which skills others have said that you possess. After you've gone through and identified a number of those skills, I want you to go back through it, and I want you to identify what your top 3 skills are, what your top 3 abilities are, what areas is that in? And then ask yourself, are you using that? And if you're not, where can you use that to make a difference in this world, to be a blessing to others? Not only do we have natural talents, but specifically to us when we become believers, God has given us what the Bible calls spiritual gifts. And it sounds like kind of a strange phrase, but a spiritual gift is a specific ability that God's Spirit places into us. Think of it this way. When Jesus was here in this world, he possessed all of God's Spirit and all of those abilities. When he ascended into heaven, he sent his Spirit into the hearts of believers. And they were given the opportunity to, in some small way, begin to reflect a piece of who Jesus was to the world around them. So Romans chapter 12 and 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and Ephesians chapter 4, they mention some of these spiritual gifts that God has given to people. Maybe it's the gift of mercy, where you're able to extend to others the mercy that Christ has extended to us. Or maybe it's in the area of teaching, where you're able to take the truths of scriptures and explain them to others. Or maybe it's in the area of faith, where you have this ability to look at difficult situations and to trust that God is going to bring good from that. Or maybe it's the gift of hospitality, where you're able to welcome strangers and welcome others into your home. There's all kinds of spiritual gifts that Christ has given to members of his church. And we're specifically to use those in order to help people to experience Christ in their life. So natural gifts are first article gifts. Spiritual gifts are third article gifts, where Luther in his explanation says that he's enlightened me with his gifts. So I also have a spiritual gifts assessment for you included in the packet. And this is going to be a little bit more time intensive. The video for today might be a little shorter, but the work that you're going to do is going to take you a little bit longer. So again, I'd invite you to pause at this time and to look through the list of spiritual gifts, to answer some of the questions, and to identify, as a believer, what is that unique way that God has gifted you so that you can show Christ to others. I mentioned earlier that a critical word to our conversation in this session is stewardship. When you think about stewardship, not only do you think about managing the land resources, but managing the monetary resources. Stewardship is about money. What do we do with the money that's been entrusted to us by God? At least a couple of times a year, my wife and I will sit down with our financial manager. We'll take a look at where our finances currently at. We'll talk about some of the goals that we have for the future of our finances. And then we adjust the plans that we have. So if we're saving for kids' college funds, or for our retirement, or we're talking about paying down our mortgage, we'll have those conversations. But when it comes to financial stewardship biblically, it's not just about the portion that we're setting aside and saving. It's about how we're managing all of the funds that God has entrusted to us. You see, the Bible talks a lot about money. Maybe we wish that it wouldn't, but it does. There's well over 1,000 verses that reference how to be wise with the money that's been entrusted to us. And a quarter of the words that Jesus says talk about money. Why does he talk about money so much? It's because money is a part of living a healthy life. And if we get money right, it can be a blessing to us. But if we get money wrong, it can cause us great pain. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6 that you can't serve both God and money. So the best thing to do is to serve God with our money. But how do we do that? It begins by connecting those two sectors that I mentioned earlier. we have natural skills and abilities that we're able to put to work in the world, as we make a contribution to the world, as we have a job. And as we're able to make money, then we're able to turn around and to invest and to give back a portion of that money to the work of the church. It's for the sake of the world and also for the sake of the church. Wise financial stewardship of our money can be broken down into 3 different categories. It's what we save, it's what we spend, and it's what we share. There's a portion of it that we should be setting aside. We should be setting aside for long term. We should be setting aside for emergencies that might come up. There's a portion of it that we should be spending on our needs, even to spend it on things that we enjoy. The Bible makes that clear. But then there's also a portion of it that we need to be sharing with others who are in need, sharing with others who may have less than us, and specifically sharing with our local church as they carry out the gospel ministry that God has called them to. Christians have referred to this consistent and generous giving to the church as the practice of tithing. The word tithe means to set apart 10% of your income for work in the local church. It's a recognition that God has given us it all. He's given us the skills, the talents, the abilities, the relationships, the connections that we have. And as a way of saying, God, thank you, I'll continue to put my trust in you, we turn around and we give 10% of it back to the local church. As you look at what the Bible has to say about our giving, it says that it's supposed to be 2 things. Number 1, it's supposed to be consistent and proportional. 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2 says, on the first day of the week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income. Secondly, it should be willingly and cheerful. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 7 says, each of you must give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And so what we invite each member here at St. John's to do is to sit down, if you're married, to sit down with your spouse and to prayerfully consider, where are you at right now? What is a consistent sum of money that you can set aside proportionally? Maybe it's every week, maybe it's every month. And then what's God willingly leading you to do? Well, we don't want to twist your arm to give. We're not telling you how much to give. We're not publishing to others how much you're giving. We want you, as you understand the generous heart of God, to be led to turn around and set aside a portion of your income toward the work of the local church. Maybe that means that you're not at 10% yet, but you're beginning to move in that direction. Maybe you're starting at 2 or 3% or 5% or 7%. We ask that you would be generous with the gifts that God has entrusted to you, knowing that there's going to be overflowing blessing in your life. God says to test him in this, to see if he's not going to give you even more. I can tell you personally in my life, I have never regretted a penny that we have given to the work of the local church or to other mission organizations. And God has continued to bless us with more. Here at St. John's, there's 2 different ways that you can give. You can either give as you come to worship. We have offering boxes that we invite you to put your gifts into each week. Or you can also give online. I'm going to include the link for you on our website that you can go to, and you can simply set up a reoccurring account from your bank account so that you can continue to support the ministry here at St. John's as the Lord leads. And I want to say personally, thank you for that. Thank you for choosing to put your trust in God. Thank you for choosing to be a wise financial manager of the gifts that God has entrusted to you. Luke chapter 12, verse 48 says these words, "To whom much is given, much is expected." In other words, we need to be looking at our input. We need to be looking at what God has put into us. And then as we realize how much we have received, then we need to consider our output. How can we turn around and use that for good in the lives of others? That's stewardship, managing the resources entrusted to us, using the abilities that God has given to us in order to be a blessing to others. I pray that in this time that we've spent together, that you've been led to do that. When it comes to your natural abilities, consider the input and your output. When it comes to the spiritual gifts that God has given to you, and maybe you didn't even know you had a spiritual gift, but after today and this time together, you're looking and you're realizing, yes, I have a unique opportunity to use the gifts that God has given to me to show a little part of Jesus and His love to others around me. And financially, to look at what you have received, and then to consider how you turn around and how you use that to be a blessing to others. You know, we all have different capacities. We all have different capabilities. And yet there's not a cap on it. It's not something where we're never going to be able to increase our capacity. We can actually train ourselves to increase our capacity. I think about holding our breath. A while back, we had a challenge as a family to see who could hold their breath the longest and how long they could hold it. Many of us made it over a minute, and I made it over 2 minutes. But I bet if I trained myself, I could increase that even more. I have a friend who lives overseas, who lives in Asia along the ocean. And he does a lot of diving and spearfishing. And he's learned to train his body to hold more breath for a longer length of time. But that's not even close to the person who has the world record for being able to hold their breath. But the point is, you start somewhere and you continue to train yourself to increase your capacity. Today, you're starting somewhere. And I want to encourage you to consider some next steps that you can take as you continue to increase your capacity and to lead out of that. The first next step is simply to determine one area where you can serve in the life of the church. Secondly, if you're unsure of what that looks like, we have a Serving at St. John's form that I'm including for you. It asks you to tell us about your personality and the natural abilities that God has given to you. And then it lists a number of areas where you could potentially serve. We invite you, as you're joining our church, to go through that, to fill in some of those answers, and to consider where might be that next step where you can serve. Next, I invite you to take that spiritual gifts assessment. I've got an online link for you, and there's a number of others. If you just want to do a Google search, you can find a number of different spiritual gifts assessments. Just try it. See what answers it begins to give. Next, determine what you will give financially. Maybe you've never consistently given to the church. Consider taking this time to identify what that initial number is going to be for you. And then finally, the next step to take for you might simply be setting up online giving. Finding a way to consistently and proportionally give to the church in a way that you are willing to do and where we are generously blessed by it. We're all stewards. We're all managing the gifts that God has given to us, whether it's out on the farm or at home with our families or sitting down with a financial manager. as you have those conversations, I pray that God is at the center of it and that you'll continue to lead within your capacity. I'll see you again next session as we talk about that final L, living for Jesus.